Well, welcome everyone, and special thanks to all of our angels today, Anne, Angela, and Nicola, who's going to be popping off. And it's really great for everybody around the world to be able to join us. I am here in Florida, USA, attending to my dad, it's quite early for me, so you can hear a little bit of croakiness in my voice, so hopefully that will clear shortly. But I'm really interested, and I would encourage you to try and join a breakout room today because I put this together as a dialogue. Obviously, I can talk forever about contracts and contracting. I'm a published author in this area, and I've got a model for you around that today. But one of the things that I find, particularly when the economy is not as robust as what it has been, is that coaches can get quite lonely. Can get quite feeling like I'm the only one where I don't have enough work, or I'm feeling overwhelmed because my clients are um, expecting a lot, or resiliency isn't as great. And then, of course, systemically, we pick up all of that, and then we might start feeling that way. So today is a great opportunity. You will have two breakout rooms and an opportunity in small groups because I've asked for groups of about four people. There might be a couple of five, there might be a couple of three, that sort of thing. So please do try and connect with people. Certainly, I understand if you aren't comfortable in that form as well. Anyway, what I just want to do just a couple of context setting slides here. I more recently we have been working in partnership with David Clutterbuck, and also I have done work with Peter Hawkins in the past, and was on faculty for the Global Team Coaching Institute, which is now the coaching.com team coaching program. But we also provide coaching and mentoring for coaches, supervision for coaches, and team coach training, as well as working with clients out there, just like everybody else is doing. This is me looking similar, hopefully. Um, I've been in the industry for, gosh, too many years now, probably. I started coaching in the end of 2000, beginning of 2001. And I'm a EMCC master coach, as well as individual, as well as team coach, and a qualified supervisor. So you can see all the credentials up there for those who that makes it interesting to know where I've come from. So what I'm really interested from, obviously as a speaker, I get to set the agenda here. So is really looking at what's the difference between a contract, which is kind of that thing that you put together at the beginning after you've done the scoping, you understand what the brief looks like, how many sessions do we have, all of that, and really looking at the signatures that are involved, etc. So critical in our industry to get that right and continue to revisit it. But how many people actually go back to it? How many people actually spend the time up front looking at co-creating the partnership that we are working together on? And what is the difference if you just have a brief and a contract document versus how much are you actually looking at what are the client's learning objectives? Do they align to their strategic business outcomes? Do they have learning initiatives as a culture that look at organization success? And what conversations outside of that one that you're having with your client sponsor or with your coachee or with your team, whichever that happens to be, or your group, whether you're doing one-to-one or one-to-many, what kinds of conversations are actually required to make sure that that engagement stays on track? So regardless of the context in which you're doing your coaching, how can you make it so that we're role modeling what it's like to learn together, so that we're actually learning with the client as they're learning, so that we're really understanding the organizational context or that individuals um, totality of this system that they're working in, not just who their line manager is, but who are some of their coworkers, what's happening at home, how's their community look around them, and what are those partnerships and how are we getting them to help the wider conversation? Because I don't know about you guys, but I think that we are having a lot of need for community right now, whether it's in our own here or whether it's clients having that community. Being in the US, I'm normally based in just outside of Sydney in Australia. I've been there, excuse me, for about 26 years. So I can tell you that around the world where I am playing, community is needed. So I have an underlying bias for this particular conversation around that. So how do we co-create those partnerships? What's actually needed? I think that if we start with what a traditional client and vendor relationship looks like, I know there's a ton of bullet points on here. I don't have very many slides at this presentation. You'll be happy to know. And as Nicola mentioned, we will be giving you the opportunity to get these slides as well as I've got a handout for everybody. So what we have found in doing some research around this is that traditional contracts or traditional client-vendor relationships are transactional. And we should have those. We need to understand what are the prices, what are the deliverables, what are the services going to be provided, who's doing what, who's actually responsible for who brings the content, how often do you communicate? Is it only in the sessions or can clients contact you in between sessions? What what are things that are out of scope? What are things that are in scope? For those of you who have a consulting background, this will be really second nature. For those of you who are new into coaching, this is sometimes feels really daunting. And I would suggest reaching out to other colleagues if you're new and asking them to share contracts or asking them to look over your contract. What am I missing? Putting it through AI these days. What are those ways that you can check out to make sure that you're covered legally? But then what does that set up for us if that's all we've got? Because that then means that the vendor, us, people supplying the contract, are more of a supplier because it's an order. It is we need somebody who needs 6 sessions or 10 sessions over a year. It costs X. During this time, this is what we want the outcomes to be. The risks are usually borne separately. The client usually holds the most control because oftentimes you're signing their contract. Um, and what does that then set up in the psychological contract in that thing that's behind us that isn't signed off for? So oftentimes then, if you have difficulties, it then feels like there's a reactive or an us and them sort of style of relationship that can be established as a result of that. And things like profit and cost controls are key priorities. And oftentimes there's not renewals as a result of that. Whereas if we are a strategic partner, if we are looking at much more um, collaboration beyond the contractual terms, that sets up a different paradigm. So we are going to be looking at how do we create those things? And that's what I'm wanting people to be talking about today. People generally know this environment pretty well, unless you're a newer coach. But what is it like? Have we stepped into more of the partnership relationship? And what I have noticed in my career and seeing people coming in through supervision is that there's something about togetherness. There's something about a totality of creating something new and whole and fresh. And that's a learning environment. Oftentimes, features of that might be collaboration and a shared vision. You would hope that there's mutual trust, transparency, and joint risk management, But oftentimes those are relegated to the bigger transformation projects, to something that has a long-term horizon, something that's at least a year, 18 months long. Communication is often because they've invested a lot of money typically in those sorts of engagements. And there's lots of partnering with regard to what's the outcome? How are people going to be acting? What are things that people might be saying as a result of going through this? If you've done any training, there's oftentimes, what are some of the success measurements? What are the ROIs? What are our people going to be doing after the training, right? But do we do this in one-on-one coaching? Do we do this in one-to-many coaching in the group or team sorts of types of forums? Is there shared decision making and joint problem solving? What happens if that team gets stuck and you're coaching by yourself? You don't have a co-coach, for example. Do we have the measures in place in the contract, in the physical contract, or have we even thought about what those things might be in the initial conversations? And how do we manage that? What sorts of conversations are going to need to happen throughout the life cycle? I know I, for one, these days, I'm kind of a bully this way, but if I'm doing a one-to-one engagement, I will not do it unless there is another party involved. So I oftentimes coach at the senior level, even with the CEO. I would like the CEO, even if it's not a three-way conversation inbuilt, to make sure, do they have someone that they have as a trusted advisor? Might be the head of HR, might be somebody on their team that they've worked with for a long time, might be the chair of the board, but somebody who has their back who could say, look, this is what's needed from the coaching, and here's how we're going to work together when I get stuck, or I'm trying to change this behavior, or I need to bring people along on the journey. Can you help me? Because you're really great at that. So, how are we getting people involved in their own learning so that they're taking it back? What ends up happening is they take it back into the organization and they do it with others as well. So we're creating a learning environment. We're artificially helping them to do that. So a couple of key tips around this before I put you into breakout rooms to start talking about this is, how do we focus on value creation? How do we look at what's the innovation for this client or for this team or for this organization that is looking beyond just their myopic view, maybe around, oh, we need a behavioral change, or we need somebody to be able to communicate more impactfully. Like, how is that going to look different than the thousands of other engagements or the 5 other engagements you've done before? And oftentimes that can come from that partnering, from talking to other people in the organization, and oftentimes that will lead to other work for you as well. And in building that mutual commitment, continuous improvement, looking at what happens if there's conflict, or what happens if there's a restructure, or what happens if this person decides to leave the organization as a result of coaching. And what are those areas where we're looking at investing in each other's successes? What opportunities can we look for some profitability measures or some KPIs, and looking at what are the health metrics of that particular engagement? So there's an opportunity for us to be sharing here today around, what have you done that works for your business, or where are you stuck, so that the whole industry can lift and do this better. Because what I'm seeing right now, particularly in one-on-one coaching, is that it's a very much traditional client-vendor relationship. Client has done this forever. They've got a standard boilerplate contract. They send it to you, you sign it, you get the coaching going. Everybody seems happy in that, but it's feeling a bit sterile. And is it really helping the learning that's needed in an organizational level? Is it really helping the person who's longing to feel heard, who's longing to feel a bigger part of the organization, who needs some community outreach or who needs some input into their learning in the organization. And I don't know about you guys, but I think that I'm a pretty solid coach. And I'm one person who gets to see that coachee or that team or that group every so often. How easy is it for them to slip into bad behavior or into the thing that we're trying to create, help them break, right? So there's a what's in it for all of us as well about making the engagement look really fantastic by doing some partnerships here. So my last thing I'm going to put on the table that's not on this slide before I go into what we're going to talk about here is if we were in lockdown again in COVID, would this be top of mind for you? Because I think that what has happened is we've gone back to business as usual. Whereas what I saw during COVID is there was a lot more looking at the system, a lot more looking at community, a lot more having conversations, making sure people are being cared for, looking at what do I need for myself, doing the engagement. So what we're going to do here in just a second is we're going to put you in breakout rooms for about 20 minutes or so, and you're going to have a chance to just do a quick hello. This is who I am. This is the sort of coaching I do. But the focus is going to be to talk about these three topics. So if one of the angels could put these into the chat box so people have this, or if you want to take a screenshot, however you like to do that. I'd like you to think about your client engagements and what successful partner relationships or contracts were great. What were some of the highlights? How were they different from just a boilerplate or traditional contract style of engagement? And do you have any examples where, the traditional contract supported or hindered a business outcome? Or if you've got a partnership sort of focus, what helped or hindered that sort of business outcome? So, how has that shaped your practice, or what is the gap that you would like to do differently? Or how can you share collectively about having more of a partnership model that you can use in your practice? And then what we will do is, I'm not sure based on the size of group today if we'll have a few people check in, but I would like to have everyone be able to have what is needed as their comeback. And we will have everyone put that into chat. And I would like to hear from a few people as far as your own outcomes. So we'll be bringing you off of mute. So we've got some great stuff coming in here in the chat when you start reading through these things. It looks like people are really getting a sense of looking at, you know, longer term and really looking at some partnering types of things. I'm curious about Esther, if I can get you to come off mute, because you had both a question and then you've got some questions in your comments here. So can you kick us off to having a few people sharing live, please?
Okay. Um, Partnering only works if people are wanting to partner.
Mm, yeah.
And usually when team coaching, it is a team that needs coaching. And I coached an alumni board and they already had their own power dynamics. And breaking that is through contracting at the very beginning and role modeling the contracting and
Yes.
being an inclusive coach and inviting everybody to join the partnership. However, teams can be toxic and they have their history. So the challenge I had in that particular situation was partnering with encouraging everybody to partner and contract on that without going into their own power dynamics that were present beforehand. I'm sorry, this is more a case study.
It is, which is awesome. Yeah, so you bring up a really great point here, Esther, in that how do we role model what it is that the team or that the client needs to see and also hold some boundaries because oftentimes those habits or those behaviors are already ingrained. And so can we be kind of, let's say, bold enough, I'll say, to kind of even in the early stages be curious about. So I like to work in partnership. I understand that, there are established ways of working already. Wow. Factors for those of you in the business world or who understand that terminology, ways of working. And how do we work together so that we can establish new ways of working, and setting the stage from the very initial conversations around here's what I bring, here's what I expect from you. How can we make this work together so that we got something new? So that's a general equation for that contract. And it's tough, isn't it? Because when you're met with resistance, it feels like you're bumping up against a wall, doesn't it? Um, so how do we continue to do that? And we don't even have to be heavy-handed about it. Oftentimes you can role model that coaching curiosity and going in there and really looking at day dot. And I find that when there is resistance, oftentimes it feels really slow. But for us to go quite inward and to be more thoughtful in the way we're approaching it, or to use a sense of purpose, to feel quite purposeful when you go in there talking to a client. And it's use of silence can be really powerful for breaking power dynamics. So those might be some tips, Esther, for you to try there. I'm going back to the chat here. We will get into a bit more about that though. So, Alexandra, where are you at? Can you come off of mute? I'm curious about getting some more detail about what you have shared here in the chat with your group.
Me.
Yes.
Okay. So as I said, we were 4 persons in our room and we had 4 different, I mean, not necessarily ideas, but experiences. Some from inside, companies or corporate environments. I come from an academic background, now as a freelancer, and coach and so on. So we just talked about our experiences and we had 4 different inputs and takeaways. And then we were wondering, because we saw that there are over 60 people attending this meeting, and we were wondering if we would get like also 60 different, experiences. And also, like I also commented in the chat, or if we would see patterns that are overlapping. So that was also like a question. And yes, about humanizing the contracting and the collaborations, because this is also something beyond a paper or paperwork in general. You also should take in consideration the humans behind, depending if, like you're contracting like B2B or B2C, but nevertheless, like how you personalize it, how you can get both ends to meet, to be flexible about it, to keep open, and also to learn when to say no or when your expertise ends, and how to direct, your clients or your partners towards other experts.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, nice. And I love what you bring here about the fact that people's experience will be different. And I think that what ends up happening oftentimes is that, a traditional contract is oftentimes a power imbalance, right? Because the client is the one paying the bill, and then we go subservient to that.
Yeah.
And so systemically, then what that sets up is a paradigm that I have to do what the client says. And so we defer, or we don't try and write that so that we're at an adult to adult, or, a much more together kind of conversation. And especially if you're newer, or if you really need the work, or um, you think you can really help this client, like how many of us have done that one before? And then you take that into the system, and then it creates this systemic way of working where we are feeling beholden to the client, or we don't want to put a step wrong. And so the experience is going to be different based on what their environment is as well. And it's interesting because Andrea Baldo, love to have you come off mute and share a little bit about this, because you've touched on um, the idea around working with the entire system. So can you give us a little bit more about what your group talked about there? Because that's kind of the antidote, and that I don't see Andrea or Andrea.
Here I am.
Andrea, lovely. Thank you. There we
Okay,
go. See you now.
thank you. I don't know if I'm the best person to call out, because actually it was Fiona, I think, bringing
Okay.
this topic in our
Well,
team.
Fiona, come off mute as
Yeah,
well.
um, but definitely is considering all the different parts that are included into the contract, that are, might be not just the one that you traditionally see, like the client, or very often the HR is involved, or there are other elements of the system that have an influence on the contract. So what you contract with a leader or with a person maybe is not in, or could be influenced by other element. But maybe Fiona, you want to add something related to your human learning system.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And just to say that we're in the same group as Alexandra as well. So it's the same, it's a different
The
perspectives,
same group.
the same group. So I'm new to coaching. I'm still doing my qualification, but I come from voluntary community
Congratulations.
sector here in the UK, and very heavily involved in health and complexity. And we've really adopted the human learning system approach. So this is where you look at the humans, look at people and all of their intersectionality, as opposed to, business is so focused on KPIs and metrics, and it dehumanizes the people who work in the system. We all have lives, each and every one of us, and so do our coachees, regardless of where they are in their organization. They're going to have families, they're going to have needs and wants and pressures, and all of that comes into play in relation to who we're working with. So I've put in the chat as well about the shift from the transactional. It's not about the metrics and the KPIs. It's about how we support each and every one of us to flourish. We have a vested interest in us all flourishing. And if we flourish, the system flourishes. And the system is what we all operate in. And it really resonated, Tammy, when you said about community. And I think community is key, because if we all support one another, regardless of the power dynamics and where we are in the system, we're human beings, we're adults. We also need to look after the children and give them a system to flourish in. It benefits everybody, and it benefits business as well. So there's a lot in the complexity, but it's that move from the transactional to the relational.
Yeah, thank you. So beautifully articulated. Thank you, group. I'm glad we've got everybody in that group. We'll be looking forward to hearing from other groups in the next breakout room as well. So it sounds like a really rich conversation. I'm sure others had that as well. For those of you who are new to this concept of systems, I'll just do a quick little teach around this, is that if you think of, let's say, a virus in a petri dish, is that whatever is happening in that petri dish will start multiplying right? So if you're looking at a culture of, influenza A, for example, um, if it's got the right conditions, it's just going to grow, right? And so we have that in humans as well. But what's interesting is that we, for many decades, have taught individual coaching to look like, okay, here's the coach. I bring all this great tools and techniques and listening and, all my years of experience, etc. And then the client comes in and they bring all of this content and their experience and their wisdom. And together we co-create this environment where this thing called coaching happens. Well, the reality is that both people come in with their family histories, their work histories, their beliefs, their biases, their value systems, everything else. And then in that co-created environment, you're creating something new. And what happens if I'm the coach and I ask my client a question that doesn't fit for them, they might react to that. Or if I ask them a question or make a statement that really resonates with them, then they will flourish, using Fiona's words. And they'll continue to grow and develop as a result of that. Like that's as basic as what I can make the magic of what coaching happens. But it is because of the two people informing each other in the way that they're learning together. And we forget that it is a system. And so are we actually even in a one-to-one looking at for that opportunity, which is why I'm so passionate about partnering, because particularly industry standards should be in the coaching industry I'm talking about here, should be, can you co-create, can you partner to create something greater than the whole of whatever it is you're working in? So even if it's only one-to-one and you never get to see a client sponsor or a line manager or whatever within that organization, are you looking at something greater between those two individuals? Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the deck here just briefly so that we can get on to the next conversation. Thank you, everybody. So one of the things that I think that people take for granted is this aligning outcomes and the value. And I know that KPIs can feel quite sterile, so I don't want to just focus on this, but I think it's also really quite important. And I think that this is where lots of the coaching schools let us down because many coaching schools don't have time in the curriculum to actually go into this sort of thing. So whether you're doing individual coaching, group coaching, team coaching, oftentimes we pay lip service to it. You get a couple of hours, maybe if you're lucky, in a program to talk about this. I would suggest that if you are learning any of the coaching methodology or if you are in a very complex engagement, that you have a peer learning group and you start thinking about these things, about what is the growth that they're looking to see? What are some of the operational efficiencies? How are we mitigating risk here? And it's really fascinating because I had a supervision group last night and we were talking about one single individual in a high profile business. If I name the business, people would know who the business is. And they're in the media right now. This particular company is in the media. And this particular individual got coaching for resiliency. And because this person's an executive and their company is in the media and they don't know how to lead a team, then they came to the session and the coach brought this case study about the fact that the client didn't want to talk. And what do? Because they're feeling so pressured. And we talked about, whose agenda was it? How do we work with that? Etc. And so even in a one-to-one, I won't go into the case, but even in a one-to-one, what's the ROI for that particular engagement? And we talked about the fact that the organization has been sold this big thing on resiliency and, fostering, the make things happen sort of attitude behind it. And is that really right for the client? Can the coach actually even bridge that sort of a brief? Or what's actually needed for that particular person sitting in front of them? Outcome was, just to stay on that for a second, was that, well, resiliency for that person had not been clearly defined. It had been defined by the organization. So maybe it was just a moment of silence that that person needed before they got going. Or maybe they needed to look at developing a stakeholder map around them about their family system or their people system that could support them through the difficulty that they were facing right now. Or maybe they're faith-based and they need to go see someone in the clergy or what have you. But this is, if you look down the list of bullet points here, engaging stakeholders, making sure that you've got shared expectations, looking at on the challenges of translating those goals into actionable learning. How do we look at effective learning objectives that have supported business outcomes? And for those of you who are doing one-to-many sort of style of coaching, so critical. And I think that what ends up happening is we do it early on. What is best practices in the industry is that we might look at what's the commission or what's the contract that we're striking, and we get it all put together. But then how often do we go back to that? If you've got a team contract, a team development plan, what does that look like? And how often are you revisiting that with the client? Or you've got a individual learning plan. Are you going in often and revisiting it? Are you taking some of the things you know really well in individual coaching by at the beginning of the session saying, so how are you tracking against your objectives? What have you learned since the last time we got together? And bring that back into the session that's coming up next. Are you continuing to do that cold learning cycle of reflection? And that is how you start building the partnership. And it could be that you're doing that with your stakeholders or with the client sponsor or with the line manager as well as part of your contract. Again, if that's inbuilt, are you getting paid for doing that? If you're adding additional stakeholders? And do you have confidentiality measures in place to be able to share those things? So I'm covering a lot of territory here, but the idea here is for us to have some conversations around this is how can your initiatives drive return on investment or return on innovation, if you want to use a different I word, or even return on learning, ROL. I like that one. What's your return on learning? What are some of the key conversations that you need to have a true engagement, to have people bought in? So going back to what Esther was talking about when you got that defensiveness or that, closed off sort of thing that you're up against, how do you actually get some conversations that unlock a different way of working? And then how do you effectively scope out the learning objectives for that engagement? What are some things that will help us to really advance that collective ability, that way of working that we can all be offering to the industry here? So again, same sort of format. Love to open the breakout rooms, please, angels. And I would like 15 minutes, please, on this particular. Actually, let's do 12 minutes on this particular breakout room. And then we'll come back. We'll do a couple of debriefs like we did before. And I'm going to call on some people. And then we're going to wrap up the session with a few tips. I do have a model that I'll walk people through. And I also have a new tool that I will share. So stay tuned for that as well. Look forward to seeing you back shortly. Welcome back, everybody. I see some smiling faces, so I'm hoping that that was a rich conversation, another enlightening conversation. I would love to hear, like, what do we collectively need in order to lift? Like, how do we feel that we were talking about in our session a little bit about not just ROI, but a little bit about um, how do we measure our own value? How do we feel like we have something of value to give to the client? And how important it is to have that agency. Because again, if you look systemically, however we go into that client will also inform how that engagement is, or how we feel on the day is going to be how that session unfolds. And so when you're contracting, you're building the contract, or even if you're contracting in that session, what do we want to get out of the conversation today? How you are showing up has a direct impact in how that's going to unfold. So I would love to hear in the chat box, first of all, each person, I'd love your reflection on what did you get from that conversation? What's one thing that you're going to take into creating some partnerships? So if you can start typing those into the chat, I'd love to read some of those.
I know we had a good conversation. We spoke, there's 3 of us in the group, and we all contributed. But general factors were, having definitely creating a situation where there is that the element of psychological safety, non-judgment, especially. Homing in on body language as well, trying to use factors of spotting body language and maybe commenting on it. If there's positive body language, making sure that it's kind of maybe noted, and having that therefore kind of you're neutral, but you're also using that that skill set which you need to, which develops eventually to kind of maybe influence. But we spoke about being transparent to all stakeholders, having transparency, being a situation where we could where that comes across. We also mentioned about we mentioned about ROI, return of investment, but we kind of said that obviously return of investment, because most of my coaching has been in relation to behavioral changes more than return of investment. I work in the hospital, and how that can actually influence kind of like departments, areas, management, more being clients being more productive within that area. So it was we had a varied kind of contribution to the actual questions, but the main aspect was kind of like having that real good transparency, building good psychological safety, having non-judgments, even though you may want to tell them what to do because you've seen it all before, and letting them using that the actual gaps or the spaces where people having that maybe uncomfortable to actually get them to speak and not interrupt and etc. So that was it generally. That was what we kind of said as a whole in our group.
Mm, mm. Thank you so much for that summary.
Thank you.
Will, I'd love to hear more about your disagreement. Let's put a cat amongst the pigeons here.
Cool. So I feel that ROI, well, the conversation about ROI and coaching is a difficult one because the work that we do can be measured around qualitative and not quantitative. And my experience is that systemically, oftentimes when coaching journeys are embarked on, either for individuals or teams, There's already a hypothesis in the system or in the room around how coaching is part of a solution or is the lever. And even the outcomes are oftentimes identified as the lever that will solve the business problem. That is a hypothesis. And if we're dealing with organizations and systems as complex adaptive systems and human beings being the same, we cannot anchor coaching journeys and ROI and performance and belonging and acceptance and growth and all of that stuff on unfounded hypotheses. It is psychologically unsafe and it is irresponsible. So, to that degree, how I address it is that we remain in the room. Everybody that's a stakeholder to a journey remains in a conversation around what the levers are, what the outcomes are, how we will know that this is working. And those measures, I never call them measures, I just ask how we will know this is working. Are conversations that keep on unfolding. How do we now know that it's not working and when do we need to pivot? The third question is, what feedback do we need in order to manage this or to learn from this or to grow from this? And then lastly, what support is needed throughout? And out of that, people define their own ROI. And they can tie that back to what matters to the system that often can tie back to direct business impact. I've never had a stakeholder ever ask me in team coaching, in learning development, or in individual coaching, what is the return on investment on coaching? Because they can always answer the question themselves.
Yeah, nice. That is such a great point. Thank you so much. Love to explore this more. Maybe we can do that if you're going to be able to stay longer. But I love what you've introduced here because it's so critical about keep the conversation going. Stay in dialogue with the client until they can articulate it themselves. Really have your go-to questions about what are we actually shooting for here. So I think the ones that you've just given us there are so powerful. So thank you so much for that. I couldn't agree more with that. And really exploring like what is the bias that we're going in with, whether it's my bias or whether it's the client's bias. Is coaching the appropriate methodology, for example, and or what are the expectations that we're loading this engagement with before I even walk in the room and start meeting with the client or the team. So really great. Thank you so much for that. So building on what Will, or I guess underscoring what Will has just offered to us here about really looking at a strategic imperative. Like a strategic imperative, I think, is a business concept that many coaches, if you don't have a business background, will run from. Really what we're looking for is how is tomorrow going to be different? How are we going to be having different kinds of conversations together? Or what is the longer term on how we want to be working together? Or what is the longer term in which this person or this team needs to be working differently? And how is that going to add value back to this particular person or this particular team or the overall organization? And even if you're doing life coaching, you can be having these sorts of conversations because people are spending their own money out of their, family's budget. And, how do we ensure that what we can offer and what they need to learn are going to be something that makes a meaningful impact? Like that's really what we're talking about here. So I'm not going to go in through all of these, but here are, because you can get the slides and we can talk about these a little bit more when we get to um, the networking sort of part of this session. So with the contracting though, I published this in 2014. Many people have seen this already before. But this is my go-to model that I use and that you are welcome to use with clients. But basically, what ends up happening when you're doing this contracting is that having a shared understanding is the most important thing. So, what are we actually working toward? And as Will was just saying and role modeled so elegantly for us, was that, I'm trying to get a clear understanding about what we need here and what's in that particular system. whereas most of us focus on the outcome, which is what are the actual measurements of what we want. I want the person to be able to bring people along their journey, or the team needs to have better communication between themselves, right? That's a shared outcome. Whereas a shared understanding is the how are we going to do this? What's necessary? Who's involved? What are some of the things that we could be looking at, or what are some of the barriers here? And in order to get that shared understanding, these are some representative sorts of mindsets, but we may need to have curiosity, or someone on the team may need to have compassion, or you may have to have the courage you're a new coach to go, I really don't get it. Can you give me more information? But what you will see is that people, because they avoid having those difficult conversations, they go below the line, and you are working towards a shared outcome, but you don't actually have the shared understanding. So this model is encouraging people to do the mindset for what am I responsible for to what are we collectively accountable for. So that idea of partnering is endemic in this model. The idea that collectively we have both of us have some responsibility here, or all of us have some responsibilities, but only one person can be accountable in my world, which is why they're spoken and why they're broken out here. So with the accountability, one person is the buck stops with you. Oftentimes in a team coaching engagement, that will be the team leader. In an individual assignment, that will be the client. And so, or coaching counterpart, or coachee, whatever language you like to use. That doesn't mean that I don't have responsibility, or that doesn't mean that I don't have buy-in to the shared outcome, but it does mean that it puts the responsibility, or the accountability squarely on the coachee to look at what is their learning that they need to have and how are they going to achieve it. And there is an article that you will get that will walk you through how to do this and when you might use this. And you are welcome to share that with your clients. I have both a client article and a coach article that talks about this. So we've talked about this quite a bit already, but some of the best practices are actually in building who are those people that need to have buy into this engagement. How often are you going to meet with them, and what are the purposes of those conversations? And I love this about adopt a continuous improvement as a ways of working. Like, do you reflect, prepare, and engage people, whether it's peers, your supervisor, other people, to look at your perspective of what's happening in that partnership, or things that you're not seeing, or if you're starting to feel anxious about going in and working with a team. What is that about? Because it may not just be you, which is what the coach usually does, right? You go to yourself, get the whipping stick out, whereas sometimes it's that the client isn't coming to the party. And how do we go back to a shared understanding? How do I get into this conversation and get above the line, quit blaming myself, get above the line, and look at what's our shared understanding? The other thing is that if you're in a complex engagement, start identifying scope creep and risk factors and challenges, and start looking at what are some of those options, and how do we start talking about what we can do to get above the line or get a shared understanding. And I can't underscore enough about how do we celebrate milestones. I think that we forget that we only do beginning and end in coaching engagements, particularly if they're one-to-one. But if there's a major milestone, are you encouraging your coachee and or yourself to go have a conversation about, we've achieved this, what's next? Or with your team, how do we let other people in the organization know? All right, so I'm going to show you what the resources are in just a second, but please do a scan of this because this is how you're going to get the materials for today. And I'd love to hear. I'm one of those people that because I'm not a pure academic, I'm more of a pracademic. I'm more of a practitioner who has an academic background, is that I love to hear from people about what are the tools that are working for you. If you use these tools, what worked and what didn't work, because oftentimes our thinking changes. But the two things that we're going to give to you is the contracting for shared outcomes model, which I just went through, and the article. But then I've also developed a new tool, which is this partnership contracting and alignment resource. So this is what you're going to be receiving from us if you want to download. Here's the article, the contracting for shared article with the model. If you want a soft copy of the model, I'm happy to share that with you in a PowerPoint as well. It's a published model, so it's out there in the domain as well. But here's the new tool that I'd love to get some feedback on when you've got a chance to use it, which is the Partnership Contracting and Alignment resource. So this has got some, some ideas around what are some of the things that you might want to start talking about. If you're doing a shared vision and an outcome, what are some of the things that need to be in it? And this is a PDF, so you can actually fill it out for yourself, or you can download it and change it, whatever you want to do. What about mutual expectations, identifying risks and mitigations, engagement objectives, etc. So you will have a whole sort of cadre of things that you can use to continue to go back to for yourself around what's in the original agreement that we started talking about at the beginning. And maybe you don't want to do all of this at the very beginning. Maybe you're going to do success metrics partway through after you understand the client's environment, etc. So, and then there's some publications and so on there for you. So we will have that available for you. I'm going to stop share and let us close out, but hopefully you find it a rich resource for you. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that collectively we are better together. So please keep the dialogue going after today around these things. Make sure that you share each other's details.
Okay, thank you, Tammy.